Okay, so you may have heard this idea about spoon theory as a means of explaining or expressing how someone with chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia has to manage their energy throughout the day. But to recap, spoon theory was a term coined by Christine Maisrandino, who's the author of a popular blog called ButYouDon'tLookSick.com, very fitting title. And basically, it came to her when she was sitting around a dinner table and someone was asking her what it's like to have chronic fatigue and fibro and such limited energy. And she picked up a pile of spoons that was on the table and she said, okay, imagine that each spoon is a unit of energy and this is your allotment for the day. Every time you take a shower, brush your teeth, set the table, put on your shoes, it's like spending one more spoon. And oftentimes we seem to run out of these spoons early on in the day, and then we have to sort of pay these back. We can even sort of go into spoon debt, right? So she devised this kind of idea to explain to friends and to practitioners to help understand what it's like to feel like you have, or maybe actually have, these limited units of energy during this time. So the interesting part and question today is to see how can we actually create or cultivate or develop more spoons? Can we increase our energy, and can we be more efficient with our use of energy so that it gets us further? Well, to understand this, let's dive into some of the common challenges that people face when recovering from something like chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. And as someone who's been there myself, you can check out my TED Talk on how I recovered from chronic Lyme. I can tell you that I've fallen subject to a lot of these challenges myself. So the first one is that oftentimes what happens, and what's very unnerving, is that energy levels tend to fluctuate wildly from one day to the next. One day we might be experiencing extremely low energy, or that could persist for weeks or even months on end. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, we might have a day where we feel pretty good. And oftentimes what happens then is that if you've been sick for a while, if you've been challenged or bedbound even, we have this tendency to feel like we need to make up for lost time and lost activities, right? So we'll go extra hard on the exercise or social activities or planning or getting all these ideas going because we feel like, well, we don't know when we're going to get another day like that, so we try and fit it all in. But then what happens? We probably exert or spend too many of our spoons, and then we get stuck feeling like we have to pay the price, right? Maybe it's taken excess energy from us, and now we have to spend extra time really doing nothing except recovering. So rather than falling into this pattern, which again, I've been in myself, this wild swing of the pendulum where basically our energy levels are fluctuating from say a 2 to an 8, what would be a better skill to cultivate is a little bit of consistency. Now, I will say this takes some forethought, this takes some doing, because on those days, particularly where you feel like you have more energy, the key is to take a little step back and do a little bit less than you really feel urged to do, okay? So if you think of like an 8 or 10 or 9 or 10 being like an all-out exertion, and then the next day we're landed in bed with like only a 2, right? 2 spoons to spend. What we wanna do is aim for staying in this sort of energy expenditure range of about a 4 to a 6, such that on the good days where we feel like we have more energy and could do a bit more, it isn't that we hold back, but we do the things slowly and deliberately that we wanna do without this excitatory energy that can leave us feeling drained the next day. Conversely, on days where we're feeling like we don't have the energy, we want to really still do our best to be consistent, slowly, deliberately, with ease, going through the motions of just some of the most important things for us to do that day. So these can be, the essential self-care items that we might engage in, essential work tasks, things like that. The key is to not try and push our way through them using force and cortisol and adrenaline, but to relax, write down what are those minimum few things that I'm gonna try and approach today, and see if we can calmly do those things going through the day. By doing things in this way, we start to limit that swing of the pendulum into more of a center, and we start to actually feed back to our brain that we can be consistent over time. And typically what happens then is that our energy threshold, if we started off with only 10 spoons to spend a day, we might find that we actually now have 12 or 15 or 20 because we're just being consistent and we're slowly building up our capacity. Number two, and this goes into something that naturally happens when we slow down, is that we can become a little bit more intentional, a little bit more directed with where our efforts go. I once heard this story of a tennis player who, as he was getting up into older age, he didn't have the agility and quickness that he had before. So he started to really cultivate the skill of accuracy. And he started playing against these younger players that, bear in mind, had far more energy than he had. But what he had was this skill of intention and focus and aim. And he found that he could place the tennis ball in all of these spots that made it almost impossible for people to reach, that had them running back and forth all over the court, exhausting themselves. Meanwhile, he was able to actually defeat these much younger and more energized opponents because he had cultivated this skill of being very pointed, directed, and intentional with where he sent his ball or where he focused his energy. The third key here is really to have compassion for yourself. We can't always control how much energy, how many spoons we wake up with on a given day. What we can control is our breath and how we go about doing things throughout that day in a calm, loving manner, and feeling good with whatever we get accomplished. This goes into the fourth point, and thing that can be helpful for starting to accrue more spoons is actually savoring and celebrating the things that we did do. Now, this is something that so often falls off the grid. We forget to do this, but by the end of the day, think back to anything that you did that day that warrants a reward. And even if you don't feel like it did, reward yourself anyway. Savor those good moments, savor anything that you were able to do, and focus on what you've gained instead of the gap or what we feel like the distance, how far we feel we still have to go. All right, so we know that savoring is a way of actually increasing catecholamines in the brain, these metabolites and chemicals that can actually give us a little bit more cognition, focus, and even physical energy. And number 5 is to not try and go this alone. One of the things that can be the most draining of our energy is feeling like we're isolated, we're not understood, we have to explain ourselves to other people. When you join a community of people who already understand and are practicing these principles to cultivate their energy, focus their intention, and increase their capacity, you will find that not only are you spending less energy trying to mesh the gears with other people, but also you will be inspired and have an increase in your own energy because of the interactions and positive engagements and support that you have. So if you want to find out more about joining a community that is on the road to recovery, gathering more spoons collectively and individually, and making the shifts toward health and happiness, then check out re-origin.com, where we have a 28-day brain retraining program that teaches you and others how to reclaim your health by retraining your brain. I'm Ben Ahrens, and lastly, I want to hear from you. What are the activities or actions or practices that help you to gain and gather more spoons? Have you experienced this? Have you found ways of working or being that enable you to maybe be more efficient with the spoons that you do have? Or furthermore, like I mentioned, to even increase the number of spoons or units of energy that you perceive that you have or actually have throughout the day. So I really want to hear from you. Get some ideas going in the comments below, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a future video.